Trade reporter for Politico, Cassella, is in Washington. And Megan, break this down for us. What kind of goods will be taxed and who is going to be impacted the most? Not just the consumers, but the manufacturers, essentially.
Certainly. So these are pretty wide-ranging. The hardest hit is going to be the pork industry. The recycled aluminum industry is also near the top of that list. And then a broad array of agricultural goods. There's wine on the list. There's American ginseng on the list. There's plums, dried fruit, fresh fruit, nuts, that sort of thing. So it's largely the agricultural sector and a number of different industries within that. Apples are on the list as well. And so who's going to be affected is farmers, the farm economy, and agricultural states, which largely voted for President Trump in last year's election. So it's not just consumers that are going to be hit by this. It's a broad range of U.S. exporters that will be hurt as well.
So now the White House responded by saying China needs to, quote, stop its unfair trading practices. What are the White House's main concerns when it comes to trade with China?
With China in particular, President Trump is very concerned about the trade deficit, for one, but they've also really homed in on China's handling of intellectual property. And the White House says that China is forcing technology transfers, that American companies that are operating there are forced to hand over some of their intellectual property that's very valuable. And that's where the White House's focus is moving next, certainly. So far, the White House has only hit them with tariffs on steel and aluminum, but those weren't targeted only on China. Those were more wide-ranging, but China is certainly a large culprit for that. But the White House, they do have a number of concerns with China, steel, aluminum, technology, and the trade deficit primarily.
All right. Well, the Trump administration is expected to implement more tariffs on China, including electronics, other consumer goods. Is this going to get worse before it gets better, this sort of tit for tat, now that China has implemented its own tariffs on goods coming from the United States?
Certainly, that's the main concern that we saw today as people were reacting to this news overnight that China was implementing its own tariffs. The White House has already warned that they're going to hand down another set, but those aren't even in place yet. So it is a concern that this was just China's first move, sort of a pre-retaliation, and that they're only going to get worse before there's any sort of dialogue. There's some optimistic hope that the two sides can sit down and, farm states, for one, officials in those states are hoping that the United States and China will be able to sit down and say, look, this is negative for both of us. What sort of deal can we reach? But barring anything like that, which could be pretty far off, it's likely that we'll see at least one more set of tariffs before we see any sort of compromise.
And meanwhile, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, they're holding talks about potential changes to the North American Free Trade Agreement. The president tweeted Monday, quote, Mexico's making a fortune on NAFTA. So will these remarks impact the negotiations?
It's not yet clear. I think it's very possible that they might stay separate, but at the same time, it's just adding to the amount of uncertainty surrounding farmers, surrounding the broader economy overall, the stock market, which dropped today on the news. And so one way that it could affect it is this could, sort of kick those NAFTA talks into gear and say, with so much uncertainty, we want to at least nail this one down. Those negotiations have now been going on since last summer. They're hoping to reach a deal sometime soon. So this could be a way of saying, okay, this is one thing that we can wrap up. NAFTA is one thing that we can wrap up now that, our sights on trade are moving elsewhere as well.
Yeah, and uncertainty is a word we're hearing increasingly these days. Monday was Larry Kudlow's first day as the new director of the White House's National Economic Council. He replaced Gary Cohn. Kudlow has been against tariffs in the past. So what can we expect from him as now he settles into this big role?
It's interesting, right? I mean, now he works for the president, so one might say, oh, well, he'll adopt his views. I think that it's likely that Kudlow will adopt a big role that Gary Cohn had when he was in the same position in terms of advocating against tariffs and advocating, for fewer trade barriers rather than more, which is opposite from a lot of President Trump's other trade advisors. So it's going to remain to be seen how much of an effect Kudlow might have in that role. As I say, Gary Cohn had a lot of those same views and ended up leaving because of the tariffs, because he was so against them. And so it'll be interesting to see whether he's able to, get through to President Trump or whether things will continue the way that we've seen the past few weeks now.
Yeah, Larry Kudlow embarking on uncharted waters. All right, yeah. Megan Cassella in Washington, we thank you.
Thank you.